All right, so let's get into it, and we'll start off. So if you're new to xLights, the first time you've used it and you want to get going, this is how xLights opens up. And I suggest you entirely ignore the Setup tab and go straight to the Layout tab. There is no need to actually do anything at the Setup tab in order to get everything up and going and working. And even doing sequencing, you really don't need to set the Setup tab at all. The Setup tab is only required when you want to start controlling the lights, either directly out of xLights, or you want to configure your controllers from xLights, and therefore you need to describe exactly how they're all configured and set up. That being said, there is some interplay between the two, and there are some things that you can do that will make your life easier, and we'll talk about that. And you do need to consider how xLights looks at your models, or your props, as some people may know them, in order to make sure you wire them in a way that minimises the amount of effort that you need to go to. So the first place you would start is, and if you click on the background of your Layout tab, you will get these properties down here. And these are basically the properties of this background area. And the first thing you're going to want to do is set a background image. So you'll need a photograph of your house. I actually like using one with my Christmas lights on. Now, this is actually quite a few years old right now. But having something with your lights on makes it a lot easier for you to place your props in a place that actually represents where they actually really are on your house. Now remember that wherever this photo is taken from is going to be the optimal place to watch your show from, because when you do wipes on across the whole house and the like, this is where those wipes are going to look perfect. Every other position, everything's going to look slightly off, and that's just due to parallax error and the like. The second thing that you're probably going to want to do at this point is turn that brightness down, because you really don't want this background image to dominate, but you want it to be clear enough that you can see where everything was. Now, once you've made changes, you'll see the Save button down here goes red. It looks slightly different on the Mac, but it's basically the same concept. And so saving it will make sure that that's saved away. So having done that, the next thing you want to start looking at is, well, how do I start putting some models onto my show? And so you have all of these black buttons up here, and these black buttons up here represent the different types of models. Through to the circle or the wreath here, these are all inbuilt models with certain characteristics. I will quickly go through most of these, but not all of them. I won't touch on things like the DMX effect. I consider that an advanced topic, and therefore we'll cover that later. And we'll also talk about the import, which lets you bring in models, such as models that other people have shared, or even some of your law prop files as well. And over here we have previews, and I'm not going to go through previews because that's also an advanced topic. So let's get it set up, and let's start with a tree, because most people end up with a mega tree of some sort. To draw a prop, click once on the prop button, and you can just draw it. If you double click on the prop button, then what happens is every time you click and drag here, you end up with another tree. Okay, and that will just keep happening until you click on this again and turn off that multiple draw mode. But we just want the one tree. Now the tree prop, and let's actually put it in the right place here. I've got this tree here, which is actually a pixel tree. That looks pretty accurate to where he's going to be. And now we need to start looking at our properties over here of the tree. You want to give it a name. In my case, this happens to be tree 4. These 3 trees in the middle are now pixel trees, and they'll be trees 1 to 3. You get to decide what sort of tree it is. The flat, a ribbon tree, or a round tree. In this case, it's a round tree, but it's not fully round. It's actually only 270 degrees round, which means at the back of the tree, there's a section which has no pixels at all, because you can't actually see behind the tree. So why put a whole bunch of pixels there? So that's how you do that. we won't worry about rotation. It's not a spiral tree, it's just a regular tree. The bottom to top ratio, look, that just changes what the ratio is between the circle at the top here and the circle at the bottom here. But again, I don't really need to change it. Perspective also changes slightly how it appears, but none of these things change the way it behaves other than when you're rendering as per preview. And we'll come back to that. Number of strings. In my case, my tree is actually 18 strings. Sorry, actually, that's not true. Number of strings is actually the number of physical connections to your controller. Now, this used to be 6, but this year I've rewired it and it's now 1. And the reason for that is because there's actually now 18 strands per string. And the number of nodes per string, and this is where trusty calculator comes in. So this is actually an 18 by 19 tree. So it's 342 pixels. So it's 342 pixels, which means 18 strands per string. So what this means is it starts here, it goes up and then down and then up and then down. And it does that 18 times, hence strands per string is 18. And it's 19 pixels high, so 18 times 19 is 342 pixels, and those 342 pixels are all connected in one string to my controller. And so that's how you configure it. So what if I'd done something different? What if I'd had 4 connections to my controller? Well, in which case, I would change this to 4. Actually, let's make it 3 because 3 goes nicely into 18. And if that was 3, then you'd obviously need to reduce this. So 342 divided by 3 is 114. And in this case, obviously, it would be 6 strands per string. And the tree looks exactly the same, but now what happens is I've got 3 strings. The first one would start over here. It would go up and down 6 times. Then there'd be the 7th string would connect to my controller onto another output of my controller, and it would go up and down 6 times. And then you'd finally have the 3rd connection to your controller, and it would have a string of lights, which are 114 long, that would go up and down 6 times, and that's how that tree would be wired up. Now, a lot of people set these configurations up when they first start, and they get a tree that looks kind of like their tree and it all looks good, and then when they wire it up into their controller, they don't understand why it just doesn't seem to be working right. You know, one string's going up when it should be going down and so forth, and it's usually because they haven't got these properties set up exactly the way it's going to be wired up to your controller. Now, the beauty of it is that you can actually sequence this tree thinking that this is how you're going to configure it up, and then later on you can come back and say, actually no, when I finally got around to building my tree, I decided to wire it up slightly different, and so you would come in here and you would rewire it. Now, the important thing is you're going to have multiple strings, you need to make sure that every string is the same length. If you end up with a tree which has 3 strings, the first 2 have got 6 strands per string and the last one's only got 4, you're not going to be able to use the inbuilt tree model easily because we just can't represent that sort of unbalanced strings, and you would have to go back to doing something custom, etc., and your life would get very, very hard very quickly. So I strongly recommend you keep your strings all the same length. You can use as many here as you want. It all depends on your particular controller and you know, your power injection and all that sort of stuff. You get to decide that. The starting locations are bottom left, bottom right, top left, top right. This just governs where you start from. So in this case, it's bottom left, which means the first string starts over here, and then we progress around this way. If you stay bottom right, then it would start here and it would progress back around this way. And obviously top left, top right would be up here. So they're the only places. If you start wiring your tree from the middle and you go one this way and one that way, again, your life is going to get really hard really quick because there is no easy way to set the tree model up that way. And so you're basically back to building custom models and your life gets really hard. So pay close attention to the ways that xLights like to represent these props, because doing them the way xLights expects them to be done makes your life easy when it comes to building things. Generally speaking, you can do things easy and hard too in terms of how you wire all this up to your controller. If you do end up with 3 strings, then I suggest that you use 3 consecutive outputs on your controller. You know, I suggest that you have your start channels start at the beginning and just progress all the way through to the end. While it's possible to set things like individual start channels for individual strings, again, you're making your life hard for yourself. And you really don't want to be doing that. Just quickly running back through the rest of the fields, there's a description field here. You can put anything you please in this field. It's just a text field that will be associated with the model. So if you want to put in some information about, you know, I don't know, the connections or something, the way you've labeled your wires or something, you can put whatever you like in here. Most of the rest of this, you're probably not going to fuss much with. If you want to display faces, like images on your tree, then you might want to go into the faces and set up, associate images. I'm not going to do that. That's a more advanced topic, so we're going to do that, ignore that later. If you want to run your tree a maximum at 75%, you can use a dimming curve and set it here rather than setting it onto your controller. So you can come into here and you can set it to, let's say it was 75%, you can set it to -25 here. Right, and what that will do is every time you put something on the tree, it will reduce it in brightness by 25%. So if you're trying to be a bit aggressive in terms of the number of pixels you put onto a string before you do power injection, you can set a dimming curve at this point here, and that will guarantee that you never try and run those pixels at 100% and your power issues may be helped. The only challenge I find to that is obviously it's not incredibly obvious that you've put a dimming curve here, and so yeah, it can get a little bit lost. We'll come back and we'll talk about submodels later. I wasn't planning on going into that a great deal. Controller connection. We will talk a little bit about controller connection because setting your controller connection. So your controller connection is designed to enable you to describe how am I going to connect this to my controller. So let's imagine that I'm connecting this tree up to a Falcon controller. I can come into here, and in this case here, I'm describing, well, what sort of pixels am I connecting? And the vast majority of you are going to use WS2811s. This is actually WS2811, 2812, 2813. They're all the same. They all use the same protocol. So you can set it there. And then this is the particular port on the controller that you're connecting to. Now, if you're just using a Falcon, be it a V2 or a V3, just a standard board, this is obviously a number between 1 and 16. If you've got an expansion board on it, you might be able to go up to, you know, somewhere between 17 and 32 if you were either connecting it directly to a port expansion board or connecting it to a remote board. In this case, I actually do have this on a remote board. So let's imagine for the moment that I put that on 17. So that's going to be on a remote, and it's obviously going to use up 3 connections on that remote because I've got 3 strings, and remember, this is the number of connections that I have to my controller. Now, if you come over here and do the node layout on the tree, it'll actually tell me here that it's going to use up controller connections 17, 18, and 19. So I do know what that's doing. Now, the other thing that this little dialog here does is it tells me actually what my node layout is. So remember, we started this in bottom left. So not surprisingly, in the bottom left here, we have node 1 on string 1. And it goes all the way up to the top, and at the top of the tree, we've got node 19 on string 1. And then we come across one column to the next strand, and the numbers go down. So this is an easy way to visualize how xLights is seeing the tree behind the scenes. Now notice that xLights sees it as a matrix, right, or like a grid. xLights sees every model as a grid. In this case, the grid is fully populated. In the case of some other models, the grid's not fully populated, but it's always a grid. And then when you get to string 2, it obviously starts at the end of string 1 down here, and nodes continue up and so forth. So that's how you would define a tree. Now, I actually have some spiral trees as well. So let's quickly demonstrate some spiral trees. So I actually have a line of them. You can't see it in this photo because this is new. So let's call this spiral tree. Spiral tree 1. In this case, yes, it's a round tree. In this case, I can't remember the number of nodes, but let's say it's 35 nodes on one string, and there's a nice straight line. And then if you set the spiral wraps to, I don't know, something like 4, let's make this a little bigger so that you can see it. Whoa. You can see that it's actually spiraled those nodes around 4 times. Let's imagine it's not 4. Let's imagine it's 3. So it's created a spiral tree. In this case, it's one string of 35 nodes spiraled around 3 times to make that tree. Okay, and interestingly, if you look at the node layout of this, you can see it's actually just a straight line. And that's kind of what you'd expect it to be, because it's just one string, and it just goes from bottom to top, and we haven't set a controller connection. So let's imagine that we are going to do that, and let's set that to be WS2811, and we're going to put this onto another expansion board. So my first remote was 17, 18, 18, 19, and 20. So this is going to be 21. Okay, and then if we come back to our node layout, it'll tell me that it's just using a single controller connection, and that's because there is only one string, and therefore you'd only expect it to be using one. Now, these spiral trees, I've actually got several of them. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to click here, we're going to press Control C and Control V, and now we have a second spiral tree. So this is spiral tree 2, which is all good. And notice how that in creating spiral tree 2, it's also on the same controller connection. And that makes a lot of sense, because in this case, these things are actually all tied together, right? So at the end of string 1, the data cable runs over to string 2, to tree 2. And if I cut and paste him again, I'm going to create 3 and then 4. These aren't well laid out, but that doesn't.
Keith, just got a question for you.
Yep. Yes.
Is the controller connection necessary for export to Falcon controllers, or is it done off the setup tab?
So if you do not set, so the controller connection is not mandatory. You are not required to set the controller connection if you're using xLights. The only reason you would do a controller connection is if you wanted to upload your configuration to one of the controllers that we support uploading the configuration to. And the reason for that is xLights needs to know how you've connected it up to your Falcon in this instance in order to know how to upload that data and configure those outputs. So here we've got 5 of these trees, and we've connected them all to the same output, right? So they're all on the same controller connection, which is port 21, because in the end, they're all going to be daisy chained together. Okay. And I can do that. In this case, I've got 5 times 35, and that easily fits onto a single output of my Falcon, so I'm all good. So that's how you create spiral trees. Now, I've got a third tree, and my third tree, which you can't see here, but I figured I had a star already, so I built a tree, and I stuck it right underneath my star. And in this case, I actually built, so I call this my arch tree. And in this case, it's a flat tree. And so you can see it looks more like a flat tree. And And in this case, I have 16 strings, which is correct, although I actually only use 4 controller connections, so it's actually 4 strings. And it's four strings, sorry, it's 4 and 16, so it's 4 times 150, which is what, 300? No, sorry, 600. And I have 4 strands per string. So it looks like a 16-strand tree. It's only got 4 connections to the controller, so there's 4 strands in a row. Each strand happens to be 150 pixels long, hence it's 4 times 600 pixels, which is 2400 pixels in my flat tree. It's a very impressive looking tree. So again, how's that going to look? Well, actually, sorry, we have to set our controller connection. I'm going to, this is a cheating way. To be honest, that's exactly the same as me going into this dialogue and typing that in. Doesn't make any difference. So what does that look like? Well, again, let's look at the node layout. And here you can see there's 4 strings, hence the 4 colors, going up and down as you would expect them to. And each one's 150 long, so it's quite a long tree. And in this case, I'm using 4 controller connections, so connections 1 to 4 on my controller. And each string is 600 long, so a decent length. So that's a pretty exhaustive view at how you would go about setting a tree. Now, these are all pixel trees. What happens though if you have, as I used to have, so these trees here used to be 2 strings of dumb RGB controlled separately. So let's draw those, because there's lots of ways to do trees. So in this case, so this is tree 1. Here's a round tree. Now, he's actually a couple of strings. It's only 2 strings, and in this case, they're dumb RGB strings. So in this case, the number of nodes per string doesn't really matter, and they were actually 50s. They were, I think, 2 strings of 5-volt dumb 50s. So only 2 strings, only 2 of them. I did spiral wrap them around the tree. So you get this kind of double helix almost sort of effect as you've got these 2 strings. Now, if you come up here and look at the number of channels, this should be 6 channels, and it's clearly a lot more than 6 channels. And that's because at the moment it thinks it's a pixel tree when it's not. It's actually a dumb RGB tree. And to fix that, we need to come down to our string properties and say, look, it's not actually RGB nodes, but it's just 3-channel RGB. And now you'll see that it's going from channel 8752 to 8757, which happens to be 6 channels, which is exactly what you'd expect a tree which was 2 dumb strings to consume. Okay, so this is a twin string dumb pixel tree. Sorry, dumb RGB pixel tree. So I think that's all I need to cover. Now, notice I haven't worried about start channels, right? I deliberately haven't. What's happened up here is xLights has automatically just chained everything together and guaranteed that everything is on its own start channel. The tools check sequence is a great way to check whether we have any overlaps. And you can see here overlapping model channels, no problems found. That's always a good sign. So that means that it's put everything onto its own unique channels. Now, of course, while it's done that, they're not necessarily exactly how they would be configured in real life, but we'll come back to that and we'll fix that later when we get our setup tab up and going. We'll redo our model layout. So let's touch on a couple other model types now that we've pretty much exhausted trees. What else is popular? Arches are always popular. This is an old photo of my house because I now have arches across my driveway. Now, with the arch model, you can either have multiple arches or 1 arch. Now, in this case, I have 5 arches, one in front of another. So you're actually better off drawing that as 5 separate arch models. In my case, I think it's 128 nodes per arch. There's just the one arch. And yes, it does start on the left-hand side. That's where my first pixel is, over here. And in this case, my controller connection, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So this is going to be 25. This is going to be on another remote board. Actually, no, we don't need to do that. Let's put it on 22. We'll assume that those mini trees and this arch are on the same remote board on the Falcon. So we'll put it on to output 22, and we'll just have one arch there. I do also have some other arches. I have some other arches that sit across the front of these trees there. It's not one big arch. In this case, this is my lawn arches. It would help if I didn't have the caps lock key on. And in this case, I actually have 4 arches. And so when you put 4 in there, nodes per arch, in this case, my nodes per arch is actually pretty low. It's 25. Now, these are actually 12 volt. I think they're the 12 volt where you get the 3 LEDs for each node. So if you really wanted to represent that accurately, you could put 3 here, and that will show up 3 dots of light per node that's lit up. That obviously makes it look more like it is in reality. To be honest, it's not that important. I would generally just put a 1 there, but if you really want to be pedantic about it, go ahead, knock yourself out. It's all good. And this is going to be, well, see, now I haven't put this on a particular controller because, to be honest, this is on an entirely separate controller as well. But let's imagine that this is on another one of those remotes. And so this, in this case, we're going to make that port 25. Another remote from my Falcon. I've got lots of remotes. My yard's quite spread out, and so consequently a lot of props are spread out around the yard with lots of remotes controlling them. So there's some arches. They all look good. Now, having multiple arches in a single arch model is good, where you put your arches back to back like this. If your arches are more separated, then you're going to want to draw them as separate arch models, and you can chain them together. What else do we want to touch on? Look, most of these things are pretty uninteresting. Let's do a matrix, because matrices are also worth thinking about. The matrix model is good for pixel matrices. In this case, I do have a pixel matrix here. They're also good for P10 panels. We'll model one of those up in a minute as well. So I do have a big pixel matrix here. It's actually not that big. It is a horizontal matrix. By horizontal matrix, that means that the strings of lights run horizontally across the model. If you've wired your model up and down, that's cool. Just change this to vertical and it will work fine. The number of strings, so then again, number of strings is the number of physical connections to my controller. In this case, I think I have 3. And each string, it runs backwards and forwards 6 times, and its length is 48. So we need to go back to that calculator. So it's 6 times 48. So it's 288 nodes long. And each one goes backwards and forwards 6 times. So I end up with a matrix which is 48 across and 18 high. This was actually some chroma mesh. It's meant to be 24 high, but I just didn't have enough room and I had to cut the mesh back in order to fit it. Again, notice all of my strings are the same length. Now, while it's possible to go and wire a matrix up with a different number of pixels on the last string, you're going to make your life hard for yourself. As much as possible, it's a lot easier if you can keep things the same. Setting your starting location. In this case, it starts in the bottom left here, which means it's going to run across, up and back, etc., all the way up to the top, which is exactly how this one happens to be wired up. The controller connection here, we use 4 controller connections for our arch tree. So we're going to make this start on the 5th connection on our Falcon board. And if we bring up our node layout, we will see that here the strings are obviously running backwards and forwards across. It's using up controller connections 5 through 7 because we've got 3 controller connections. We started at 5, so it's going to use up 5, 6, and 7 on my Falcon controller. So that looks good. So I also have a small P10 panel. Now, generally speaking, to be honest, my P10 panel, I actually don't sequence in with my songs. And so I actually normally would create my own layout, a separate layout for my P10 panel rather than putting it in my main layout, because what I run on it is entirely independent of any of my sequences. So there's no point putting it in here and inflating the size of my FSCQ file when I can just run a local sequence on the BeagleBone Black to run my little P10 panel that sits up in the corner. But let's imagine that that's not how you were doing it, that you, now I've got a little Tune 2 sign. It actually sits nicely up here. And how you would configure a P10. In this case, my P10 is 2 wide and 4 high, which is effectively a 64 strings by 64 pixels P10 panel. And on a P10 panel, the number of strands per string is always 1. So it's like having 64 single strands running across. And on a P10 panel, I'm pretty sure that starts in the top left. So the top left corner is string 1. It will run across, and then the next one will run across, and then the next one will run across, and so on down. And we can again see that in our node layout, where each row is its own string. And the height is 64. Now, in the case of this one, I'm not actually going to set a controller connection. I'm not running it off my Falcon. And in fact, I can even, because of the way this would work, I would typically have this loaded as an FSCQ file on the BeagleBone Black, maybe set up as a remote from my Falcon Pi player or from xSchedule, so that I don't have to send all of that data across the network. And so there are ways that I can set that up to not be blasting a whole bunch of data over the network. But that's how you would set up a P10 panel and configure it in xLights. All right. Now, most of the other models aren't that interesting. Let's quickly do a custom model. The way you would do a custom model is you, again, click on the custom model, you click and drag, and you get absolutely nothing. To do this, you would need to go into the model data here, click on the ellipses, and you can go in and you can start to create a model. Couple of things that you might want to do. Often people will want a background image, so they'll have a photograph of their model and they just want to overlay their props, and you can do that by coming back here and setting the background image here and just choosing an image that is the background image for my prop. I don't have any images at the moment, but it really is as simple. Let's use my house image. And so now when I come in here to edit my model data, you can see it's actually put my house image in the background of it. I can come up here and make that, I don't know, 25. And 25. I can dim it down. At least I thought I could dim it down. It's all a bit slow when the image is there. And in theory, then I could go through and say, oh, that's that pixel and that's that pixel. There is a way to dim it down. I thought it was.
It's over on the other page.
Is it? Oh, okay, that's turned it off. Ooh. Background image. Not sure it is. I thought you could set its brightness.
You can dim it down.
Yeah, I know. Maybe it's. Oh, there it is. Sorry. You're right, I can. The image is a bit large. It seems to be a little bit laggy. Oops, I want to make it 225. Now, generally speaking, when you're creating a custom model, you want to create a custom model with as few columns and as few rows as you need to accurately represent your model. The reason for that is your model gets very large, and large models are slower to render, and so your rendering times will begin to suffer. Once you've got your model in here, and let's imagine that this was it, you can go and number your pixels. Now, if it's a dumb prop, you would just use the same number over and over again to show that these are all LEDs, but they're all on a single channel. If you had a couple of strings, so let's imagine you'd wired a couple of rope lights up and you were controlling them independently, then when you get to the next thing that you can control, you would start up with another number, in this case 2, and so forth, and move your way around and so forth. So if you were doing a face model like a tree or something, and you use dumb RGB for the outlines of the eyes and the tree and so forth, you would use a different number to represent each one of those. If you're building a pixel prop, you would use individual numbers for each node, just in the order in which you'd wired them, and so forth. You can also see the wiring view here. So in this case, and the wiring view is always the reverse view of your prop, and it shows you whereabouts your pixels go, or in this case, your lights go. And we'll come back to that in a minute and show you how to do that. So let's cancel out of that, and let's delete. Oops. Let's delete our custom. This drawing customs is a pain. We'll delete him. It's much easier to import a custom prop, and you do it basically the same way. You click on the import, you click and drag, and in this case what I've done is I've grabbed an XModel file off the Facebook page. Now, in the case of the Facebook page, there's a file section, and in the file section lots and lots of people have already drawn a number of custom props based on the Boscoyo or the Holiday Coro type props. And so rather than having to draw them all yourselves, you can go and download one that someone has built for you earlier. But these are just custom props. They're just like you could have built yourself. Let's try and grab that corner. In this case, it's a pixel prop, and the person's taken the time to run around the pixel and say, well, this is where I'm going to start. That's pixel 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way around. Now, if you're going to use one of these props, you're going to want to make sure that you wire the prop the same way they did. Because if you don't wire the prop the same way they did, it's not going to work. Now, the other thing to recognize here is that this is the reverse view. This is looking at the prop from the back, and the reason we show it this way is because you tend to push pixels in from the back of these props, and so having it from the rear view makes it much more likely that as you push the pixels in, you're going to get everything in the right order. Now, because this is a pixel prop, we actually draw the lines to show you how everything connects together. And if you follow these instructions and wire your prop up this way, then when you get a chance to go in and sequence it, everything's going to work perfectly. Okay, so that's how you would go and import a prop. Now, oh, damn it. To let go. All right. We'll put our bell up there. Now, when you import, you can also down here select to import from law property prop files. And in this case here, I've got a candle prop. This is a single channel. You can tell that because if you come down here and you look in the data, you can see that this individual has defined this thing, and they're all ones. Oh, sorry, they're not all ones. There's ones and twos. So they've built this as 2 channels. I'm not quite sure why they built it as 2 channels, but they did. If you now wire this up as a single channel, you'll obviously have to go in and change all of these twos to ones. Again, you can see a wiring view if you really wanted to. It's not as exciting. Notice we don't show the ones all joined together, and the reason for that is because it really doesn't matter how you populate it, but that's how it expects it to be populated. Not sure why law does it that way. And you can see that that's 2 strings. In this case, obviously, it's been brought in as 2 3-channel nodes, but let's imagine that this was actually a dumb prop, i.e. just single channels. We could go in here and just choose single color. In this case, it's red, but you could make it white. And now it's just using up 2 channels, one for the 1s and one for the 2s. Okay. So very easy to bring in props from other people and save yourselves the trouble. Did I reverse that? I think I did. So yeah, very easy to bring in props that other people have built. Saves yourself a huge amount of time. Now, I'm not going to go into how you then go and create your custom props. That's easy enough to do there. Well, or do you want me to? Do you want me to go in and show you how to actually manually create a custom prop? No answer? No one cares? Anyone?
Maybe just quickly, Keith, just don't go into too much depth because I think there is another video on it.
Yeah, look, there's a video on everything. So look, let's imagine we were. All right, let's imagine we were. We'll create a 10 by 10 grid. Here's my prop. By far the easiest way, let's imagine that this is a smart pixel prop. I'm going to do auto numbering because it's so much easier. So you make it active and you set it to auto increment. You wouldn't set it to auto increment if you were doing a dumb RGB prop because you'd obviously want to draw lots and lots of number 1s. But in this case, I'm going to want to increase it. And I don't know. We're just going to draw some random pixels here. And so you just run around the matrix, clicking on squares. Okay, and it really is as easy as this. I have no idea what this is. If you screw up, and you realize, oh, damn it, I didn't want my 19 there, and of course it should have been there, and oh, now it's all broken, etc. It's actually not that hard. Come down here, change this back to 19, click on your 19, and off it goes again. And of course, don't forget to make sure you overwrite the one that was there. Okay, nicely done. And click OK, and there's my custom prop, which I can now sequence. It's an RGB. Obviously, if I go back into my model data, I can see my nice wiring view, which looks really good. The other thing that sometimes happens is people miss a number. Let's imagine you missed a number. In your wiring view, you'll be able to see that because you'll see this break in the number sequence. And that's a problem. And you will, now that's actually not technically illegal. xLights doesn't really care. It just, when someone tries to light up pixel 21, it won't light anything up in your prop because it's not there. But generally speaking, we would consider that to be likely an error, and you've made a mistake, and you probably do want to go back and fix it and put the 21 back in. We would also consider having a duplicate in this circumstance odd as well. So let's imagine I created a second 5 there. That then causes a problem where we look at the data, and instead of joining everything together, we show them as independent nodes. And that happened because there were 2 5s. And so when we saw the 2 5s, we thought, well, hang on a second, that's a bit odd. You must think that these are actually dumb pixels rather than smart pixels. And you just happen to have 25 strings of dumb pixels, which of course you don't. And so you'd want to go back and get rid of that extra 5 and clean it up. And now our wiring view is going to look right again, as we'd expect it to. If you do accidentally wire it reversed, you can here do some simple things like just flipping it all around, which would generally speaking help. Or if you pixel reversed it, you reverse everything. So there are a couple of ways to rescue it if you happen to have wired it up incorrectly. A couple of quick ways to do it at any rate. I think that's probably the bulk of custom models. So look, don't be afraid of them. If you do something weird, so take something like the star. All right. The star is interesting because when you look at where our starting locations are, we've got some very particular places that we expect you to start your wiring your star from. The top, which is the tip of the star here, or the bottom center, which is actually the crotch of the star right here. If you wired your star down here, you're in all sorts of pain because we don't have an easy way to represent the star. And so at this point, you're probably going to have to go and create a custom model. Now, there is a cheating way to say, well, if I was going to create this star as a custom model because I've wired it starting down here, one of the things that I can do here is export it as a custom model. We'll export it as a star. We'll now delete this star. And what we'll do is we'll bring it back in from that custom model file that we just created. So now it looks exactly like it did before, but it's not actually a star model anymore. It's actually a custom model, which means it has model data. Can I expand that? I can't expand it automatically. All right, so there it is. Exactly as you'd expect, but obviously all of the starting channels are in the wrong place. So I come over here, I set active, and I say, well, actually this should be pixel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so forth. And obviously I'm taking advantage of the fact that xLights drew the star for me, and I'm now just cleaning up the numbering to be actually how I've wired the star up. There's a bit of clicking to be done here. Sorry, we can't do everything for you. Sorry. Right now, need some thinking music. We're more than halfway there.
That was my idea. I resent you even tried that. I was taking it off mute to do the same thing. Great minds think alike. And we're back.
Thank you.
All right. So now we've got a star which has got a bizarre wiring mechanism, i.e. not a standard inbuilt mechanism, but you've managed to take advantage of the star model to actually draw that for you. And most of these models allow you to do that. The only exceptions being things like the Polyline model and the DMX model and the like, where it doesn't make a lot of sense or it just turned out to be too hard, so I didn't bother. So I will quickly touch on things like the Polyline, because the Polyline sometimes confuses people, particularly things like start locations and everything else. The Polyline is an incredibly powerful model. You can do some awesome things with it. Take I got some color effects bulbs here that run around my arch. And so the trick with the Polyline is you click where it starts. In this case, it comes up to here. It then has an arch segment which curves around. So we're going to just go across to here, and then we're going to come down to here. At this point, we're going to press the escape key, which gets us out of drawing mode. So now we're out of drawing mode. Now what I can do is I can come up here and I can, all right. So I see I've clicked on this segment, and this segment is now highlighted. I'm going to right click on that, and I can define a curve. And at this point here, I can literally curve my polyline around my arch. How cool is that? So now I've got in one polyline my arch highlighted. It's going to start down here at the bottom left and arch up around. In this case, the properties are perfect. It's all 50. It's all good. Now I'm going to do my controller connection for this one just because I can. These happen to be GECE lights, and I'm going to put them onto port 10 onto my Falcon. Done. So that's how you use Polyline to do something somewhat interesting. You can also use Polyline to do your roof outline. So in this case, this is all one line. It looks like dumb rote light because it was dumb rote light back when I did this, but now it's, of course, okay. Not sure why that did that. Let me go back to Polyline again. Okay, so we're going to start it there. We're going to drag it out to here, up to here, a little straight bit back to there, goes up to there, then across to there, and then it runs all the way down to there. Okay, and then we press escape to get out of drawing mode, and that's my roof line all done in a single polyline. In this case though, I do need to look at how many pixels. I assure you it's a lot more than 50. I think it's, in fact, this length is actually 2 strings, but in this case we're just going to do 1. So if I made that 600 pixels, and then what I can do is I can define some individual segments here, and so here I get to say how many pixels are in each segment. Now it's broken it out according to how long the line appears to be, but that may not be how it actually is. That might be 120 pixels. This one here might be, I don't know, 80 pixels. It really doesn't matter, right? You can go through it, you can define the right number of pixels for each segment. Okay, now notice my controller connection is here, and so I started drawing my polyline here. The green dot here represents the start, and that's how I would always draw my polyline. I would always start it at the beginning of the string. It's the same with the single line. If I'm drawing a single line, so this thing here across this line of CE lights across here, it starts here, it goes to here. That's how I would draw it. Okay, I draw it backwards and then try and switch it around. Now you can change the start location, whether it's left or right, but I just generally draw the thing out according to the way it actually is. I find that so much easier to do. All right, so we spent enough time on the layout tab.
Keith, I have a question for you. For people who have already done their homes using single line, is there any benefit to changing it to the polyline from a sequencing purpose?
Look, the only advantage to doing it as a polyline is obviously if you want to drop an effect that starts here and then travels all the way along it, that's obviously easier to do on a polyline. Remember, if we look at the node layout of the polyline, it turns out to be a really, really long single line model. And so if I was to put a morph on the polyline, it would start here, it would run across to the edge and all the way across, assuming that I was using the default view as opposed to as per preview, etc. I like it just because everything joins up nicely and I don't have to worry about it. But look, at the end of the day, no, you don't have to. You can do it using single lines. It will work. You just got a little bit more to configure, that's all.
Got it. Thank you.
So we're all good with our layout. All right, now I haven't wired everything up here, and notice how I have not really worried particularly about start channels. In fact, if you come over here and you look at our start channels, you can see that there is actually a lot of problems in my start channels. All of these models think that they're starting on channel 1. And in fact, if I click on overlapping checks enabled down here, and I click on these models, all of this redness tells me that all of these models here overlap their start channels. And that's not a good thing, right? That means that when I drop effects on this roof line, you know, my tree's going to light up, my bell's going to light up, my candle down here, and my custom model are all going to light up, and it's all going to be ugly. If I run tools check sequence, and if you don't run tools check sequence, then you need to start running tools check sequence, because this is all our expertise built into a program that will go through and scan your display looking for problems. And here are all of these overlapping models. Right, now they're shown as warnings because there are reasons why some people might create some overlapping channels, but if you didn't mean to create overlapping channels, then this is a problem, and when you sequence, you're going to get weird behavior, and you're going to be posting in the forum saying, I'm getting all these random lights flickering when I put an effect on a model and I don't understand what's going on. Well, 9 times out of 10, This is what it is. It's all of these overlaps. But that's okay, because we're going to go and clean all of that up. So let's go over to our controller, because by far the easiest way to do this is to actually start looking at our controller. And so let's talk about controllers. Now, there's obviously a lot of different sorts of controllers out there. Yeah, but I'm really going to talk about just a couple of them. The first one is people that have Renards or LOR controllers plugged into their computer using a USB stick in their computer. Now, I'm not talking about people that plug their LOR boxes into their Falcon controllers. This is people that actually plug those USB sticks, those adapters, into their computer. And if you're doing that, then you're going to want to add one of these USB controllers. Okay, you're going to want to choose its protocol. It might be a LOR controller, and you're going to want to define the number of channels that you have, and it might just be a 16, and you can put, you know, a nice friendly description in here to describe exactly what it is. Now, you also need to choose a COM port, and obviously you'll need to know what COM port it's been defined as. And so now I have a 16-channel LOR controller attached to a USB adapter on my computer. Okay. Now, if you don't have that LOR adapter plugged in all the time and you still want to be testing some of your other controllers, one of the things that you can do is you can right-click on this line and you can deactivate it. And it will turn to grey, and that will stop xLights trying to open up that controller, which isn't there when you're doing testing on other things. Just don't forget to enable it again when it comes time to run your show in xSchedule, etc., because xSchedule will respect the fact that you've disabled it, and that's possibly not what you want to do. Now, for the bulk of your controllers, your Falcons, your xLights, your Alpha Pix, your Pixel sticks, your ESP Pixel sticks, etc., they're all E1.31 devices. And the way you would create E1.31 devices is you click on the button here and you would go and define them. Now, generally speaking, I would always recommend you use unicast. While multicast will work, there are lots of reasons why multicast will cause you dramas. The only time, in my view, you should use multicast is when you truly want multiple controllers to respond to the same data packet. And generally speaking, that's not commonly required. Unicast, the only downside of unicast is you've got to type in an IP address. It's not a big downside. It's much more efficient on your network. It means that a lot less data goes to each controller. If you multicast on most people's home networks, because you don't have advanced routers, multicast is effectively broadcast, and so every packet ends up landing on every controller, and every controller has to deal with it in some way. If you've got high-end networking gear that actually do respect the multicast protocol and require each device to actually register and say, hey, I'm interested in that data, then yeah, maybe you're better off. But for the vast majority of us, we're using cheap D-Link or Netgear or some other sort of router, and those things do not respect multicast protocols. So I would always do them as unicast. Now, in this case, I've got a Falcon controller that I've freshly reset to its shop settings. And so it's got an IP address of 192.168.1.50. The starting universe can be anything. I like to start my controllers on a nice round number. That way, I'm going to reserve all the universes from 100 to 199 for my Falcon controller, but I'm not going to need them all. So how many universes do I need? Right, now some people will go and create 96 here because this is a F16 v3. I would strongly recommend against that. Once again, you're just creating a whole bunch of data that's going to be sent off. One thing that you can do, let's cancel out of that, is we can go to Tools, Export Models. We're going to create a models spreadsheet. We'll kick off Excel, and we'll open up. We'll go to our folder. model CSV. And we can come in here and we can see the number of channels that are used. And so one of the things that I can do here is I can go through and say, well, in this case, I know that I set controller connections for everything that's going to be on my Falcon. And so these are all the things that are on my Falcon. And I have 12,177 channels. So equals 12,177. And I'm going to divide that by 510. And that tells me I need somewhere between 23 and 24 universes. Now, I'm going to actually not use all of the channels in those universes. So how about I set 30 universes up? That should be more than enough. Now, we can always come back and add them later, but 30 universes sounds like a good number. 192.168.1.50. We're going to start at universe 100. We're going to create 30 universes, and I'm going to use 510. Now, look, the Falcon, I can use 512. It will be fine. But I would generally, for some controllers, 512 is not fine, and so you'd want to set it to 510. But I'm going to set it to 512, and I'm going to do that for a reason, because I'm going to explain to you a little bit about how universes work. So there we've gone and we've created our 30 universes of Falcon data, starting at universe 100, and we're going to save that. So let's do a bit of a sidetrack or sidebar into what universes are. So let's imagine we have 10 universes, and I've allocated 10 universes, and of course 10 universes of 512 channels is, as you would expect, 5,120 channels. So here I've drawn for you 5,120 channels worth of data. Now, each one of these channels is a number between 0 and 255, and it represents generally the brightness of a red, a green, or a blue, or, in the case of a dumb channel, it represents a sort of brightness of a single string of lights, or so forth. But that's broken up, because we can't actually send 5,120 channels of data in a single network packet, so we break them up into universes. And so here we've come and we've overlaid a color, and each color represents a separate universe. Now notice the numbers under the covers haven't changed. It's still, this is channels 1 to 512 in yellow, and then orange is 513 to 1,024. Okay, and this particular pixel here is universe 1, channel 1. This is universe 2, channel 2. Now, there's nothing special about 512. 512 just happens to be the maximum number that you could put into a particular universe. The reasons for it, date way back to when DMX was used just to control lights over a serial type protocol, and these things are just being stuffed into network packets in units of 512. Now, as far as xLights is concerned, it's just a way of breaking it up into data packets to send across the network. And the Falcon sees it the same way. When the Falcon receives the data, it'll receive it in these individual packets, but it will then look at it just like it's a big slab of data. Now, in this case, of course, the universe number wouldn't be number 1, it'd be universe number 100 here, because that's what we happen to have set it to, but it doesn't change anything. It's just a block of data broken up into channels. Now let's imagine that I'm going to put some props on here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2 sets of props on here. I'm going to put a bunch of snowflakes, and I'm going to put a tree into this data. So what does that look like? So let's go to sheet 3. So here's what I've got. I've got 9 39 pixel snowflakes. Now, each snowflake is obviously 3 times 39, which is 117 channels, and 9 of them is obviously 1,053 channels. So let's overlay that. So here's my first snowflake. It's obviously going to start. In this case, obviously, we'd now be universe 100 because I've numbered it that way. And it's going to use pixels 1 through to 117. And all of that data is the data that drives my first snowflake. My next snowflake will then start at 118 and go through to 234. Again, 117 channels of data, right? 3 and so on. Now it gets interesting when we get to the end. So what happens once we get to 512? Obviously, I have not managed to fit a whole snowflake onto here. And in this case, it just flows on and goes to the next channel. And it means that the snowflake's data is actually split across universes 101 and 100. The Falcon doesn't care. xLights doesn't care. The fact that the universe was 512 was just a convenient way to break the data up. The data itself is still spread across these two universes and none of them care. Okay? So there's my 9 snowflakes, and my 9th snowflake ends, as I said, at channel 1053, which is what 9 snowflakes takes up. And that happens to sit somewhere inside universe 102. Okay? Now, what I would generally do, now these snowflakes would all be wired together front to back. And so this is how I would generally lay them out. I would put them front to back right next to one another. But then I'm going to do a tree, and the tree is a totally separate prop with a totally separate connection to my controller. And so I would generally then go and start those things at channel 1 of the next available universe, which in this case would be universe 103. Start channel 1, and here's my tree. Now my tree is a 12 by 50 pixel tree, which is 1800 channels. So it would start here. Now all of these grey pixels, all these grey channels are unused, right? So xLights is not going to fill them up. It's going to leave them as zeros. The Falcon controller is going to receive them, and it's going to store them, and it's going to do nothing with them, because the pixel tree is going to start here at channel 1537, and it's going to take up some 1800 pixels, which is going to end down here at pixel 3336. Okay, and then I'm going to have a bunch of unused data, and then if I added another prop, I would start it here at channel 3585. So I'm hoping that gives people a bit of an idea about the relationship between universes and channels. Now, these underlying numbers are what people typically refer to when they refer to absolutes, right? So these are the absolute channel numbers. Whereas this mechanism here is the universe start channel. You can see there is always a direct mapping between the two. So if we go back to what we've been setting up here, these numbers you see here in the middle here, these are those absolute numbers. So if I was to come up here and delete this law controller, you can see that it looks like, my first 10 universes go through to 5120 exactly as you would expect. Okay, so that's how they map together. The beauty of the universe number is it can be a shortcut reference to a particular location, whereas absolute, there's a reason why I don't like absolute, and that's because when you change your show, which you invariably will do next year, if you use absolutes and you start adding pixels here and there, everything starts to get very messy very quickly. So let's stick with universe.
Okay. Keith, somebody wants to know, do you need to turn off the unused channels?
No, you don't. So xLights by default will just turn them off. Every frame, we initialize every frame to zeros. And to be honest, they're not going to go anywhere. So you don't need to worry about them at all. Just ignore them. So let's go and configure our Falcon. Okay, so the first thing I need to do with my Falcon is I need to start to put some of my props onto it. So on my layout tab here, now the Falcon doesn't care what order you do things in, right? So I don't have to find the prop here that's on channel 1 and make that first. I can make that my second or third prop. Most people, for neatness, would start this way, but then when you rewire everything next year, it wouldn't be that way at any rate. So let's go and do something random. I know this is on my Falcon. Remember, I set this up on output 17. There goes YouTube. Oh, I've got Facebook open. Did I not close Facebook? All right. Okay, so let's go and grab this tree here. So I'm going to put this on Universe 100 start channel 1. And the easiest way to do that is to come down here to this start channel, click on the ellipsis, and I'm going to say Universe number 100 start channel 1. Now, you can go in here and define the IP address. Don't do that. Don't do that. As long as the universe numbers are unique, you do not need to specify an IP address. And if you're reusing the same universe number on multiple controllers, don't do that either. That's a bad thing, right? It's an unnecessary complication. You have 64,000 universes to play with. You are not going to run out of them anytime soon. We'll just do that. Now, the interesting thing here is this is telling me, okay, so this is on Universe 100, start channel 1, and in the number in brackets is the absolute channel number, which happens to be channel 1, which is kind of nice. So if you come back here, here it is, absolute channel, start channel 1. It's actually what I'd expect it to be. The other cool thing here is it tells me that it's going to end at Universe 102, start channel 2. So that tells me that the next prop that I'm going to create, I'm going to start at Universe 103 because they're not chained together. So let's come over here to my trees. And I'm going to chain I'm going to put those onto Universe 103. So we'll come into here. We set it to universe number. We'll set it to 103. And we'll make sure that this number up here is 1. Right? Make sure that this is number 1. And so that now starts on Universe 103, start channel 1, which happens to be start channel 1537. And not surprisingly, 103 is 1537. So the tree is on these first 2 universes and a couple of channels into the 3rd universe. We're then not using the rest of Universe 3, and we're starting on Universe 4, and we're starting our spiral tree there. Now, the rest of the spiral trees are quite nicely chained together. And I'm going to leave them chained together because they're actually wired together. And so I actually like to do this. This will mean that they will consume the rest of the channels through to the end. And this one here is going to start on Universe 103, start channel 421, which means it's still probably going to fit inside the universe, I think. But we can check that, because it's going to end at 2061, and 2061, if we come over here, 2061, 2061 is in Universe 104. So it's going to finish inside Universe 104. So the next set of things I'm going to do, I'm going to start at Universe 105. So what's next? My arches, maybe, this arch here? Did I connect that up? I think I did. Yep. So let's start this one at Universe 105. Now notice I'm not being particularly fussy about which prop is connected to which output on my Falcon controller, because at the end of the day it doesn't matter, right? As long as the channels don't overlap, everything's good. This one finishes on 105 as well. So when I come to my lawn arches here, which are also on my Falcon controller, yes they are. So I'm going to start these on 106. Which is fine. Start channels 1, it's all good. Now, if you click on the start channel up here, it'll actually put them into order for you. And so we can see here the order that they're all in. There's clearly some problems. We've still got a lot of overlaps here that we're going to have to go and deal with. But we're looking good so far. Now, things like these props here, which, to be honest, I haven't put them on any particular controller connection. So what I'm going to do with these for the moment is I'm going to put them onto a start channel that sits well outside my channel range, because I don't want them to be cluttering things up. So that only uses a couple of channels. The star, what's the star? Yeah, the star I don't want anywhere either. So I'm going to set that start channel to be, I don't know, 15,100 sounds good. So I'm just getting these out of the way. Don't forget to press Enter or Tab once you've entered a start channel, otherwise it doesn't necessarily take. We'll make that, where did that one end? 15,200, we'll make that 15,300. So look, I'm just getting these out of the way, stopping them from overlapping. Oh, hang on. So that tree's okay. The Polyline, we also didn't connect up to our Falcon, but let's do that. Let's throw him onto, I don't know, output 14 sounds like a good one. So he's good. We'll also put him, oh, so we have put him on the Falcon, so he's good. And this is our custom model. Let's put him somewhere harmless as well. All right, so we're getting there. This Polyline needs to go onto a universe. So what's the last universe we were up to? 106 by the looks of things. So let's throw him onto 107. So universe 107, start channel 1, looks good. 107, he finishes at 107, so let's put him onto 108. Looks good. I don't know, I forgot to press enter, did I? Because it didn't take. Yeah. Hash 108. If you don't press enter, it doesn't take. All right. So far looking good. All of these things are nicely positioned. The matrix is a bit of a problem. I haven't put him anywhere yet. So my next available universe is universe 109. So let's throw him onto universe 109, start channel 1, and so forth. Now notice, remember, the only time I used the chaining was when things were actually electrically, physically connected to one another. All these other props have been independently connected to the controller, and so consequently, I have not been using I haven't been using the universe start channel. I've been using the chaining here, and here I've been using the universe start channel because they're on a separate connection. This Polyline here, we haven't actually connected him up to anything. So let's make him GECE output, I don't know, 16. It really doesn't matter, as long as he's unique. And we'll have to put him on universe 115 because my matrix finishes on 114. Looking good. Oh, my arch tree. Oh, my little tree. Okay. I'm going to put him somewhere else because he's not actually physically connected to my Falcon. All right. So all my Falcon configured items have now all been given either universe start channel connections or chaining connections. Okay, let's quickly run check sequence, make sure that I don't have any overlaps or anything at this point, because overlaps would be not useful. So I've got some models that are spanning controllers, but they're all those things which are not on a controller. So I don't care about that. So they're okay. Overlapping model channels. Oh, I do have some. Oh, okay. My P10 seems to be causing me some dramas, as is my arch tree for some reason. So let's go back and have a look at those. So my P10's a problem. Definitely don't want my P10 anywhere near anything. So how about we throw our P10 out on 18,000. So he's good. And my arch tree, oh, so my arch tree, I didn't set my arch tree up, right? So we're going to have to put him on start channel on universe 116. Okay, that looks good. Okay, now we've got a problem here. Notice how it doesn't show a universe start channel ending location. And the reason is because I think we've run out of universes. The way I've laid all of this out, I've used up a lot more than the spare number of universes that I had. I need to go up to 15,392, and at the moment I think I go up to 5,120. Sorry, no, I go up to, I go up to 15,360, and this is looking for 15,392. So I need an extra universe. So that's cool. We can come down here. We can say insert after. We'll add an E1.31. Again, it's going to be unicast. 192.168.150. It's going to be universe, what, 130? We're just adding 1 because we'll make it 512. We'll give it the same description. Okay. So now we've got 31 universes. And now if we come back to our layout, it crashed. That's not good. Come on. It does crash for me as well sometimes. Okay. Okay. An auto-saved RGB effects file was found, which seems to be newer than your current RGB effects file. Would you like to open that instead? Okay. So if I say yes here, it's going to restore the auto-saved version, which is more up to date. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to come down to here, and because I had clicked on Save Setup, my extra universe has been created. And if I come to my layout, we were playing with the arch tree, weren't we? Where's the arch tree? Click on Start Channel, and it's nicely saved. Yep, so I actually didn't lose anything at all. And now the end channel looks like it sits inside a universe, so that's a good sign as well. That means everything's good. I've got enough channels defined. All of my props are appropriately on trees. Oh, sorry, on controllers. And if we check our sequence again, I'm hoping that most of those overlapping channels. Oh. Okay, so those models that I tried to put out of the way, it turns out that I didn't put them far enough out of the way because I put them all on 15,000 thinking that'll be plenty. It turns out it's not. So let's put them in 31,000. Let's put that in 31,000, and that one's already outside that range, but we'll put that into 31,000 as well. Okay, so everything's nicely outside the range. All right, all good. Now notice that I haven't actually created enough channels on the setup for all of these things here. xLights doesn't really care. At this point in time, I could still output all of this data to the Falcon and this data would go nowhere. So it's kind of harmless. All right, so everything here looks kind of good. Now it'd be kind of nice to have my Falcon all ready to receive all that data and do all of that configuration. Get all of these props up and going. And by far the easiest way to do that is to upload it. So I do have a Falcon here. It's freshly installed, meaning when I look at its universes that it's listening for, come on. It's just the default, the 1 to 32, which is what it would come when you get it freshly out of the box. I didn't want serial outputs. The string outputs. the defaults set up for 16 strings, etc., etc. So let's go over here and upload that configuration. So the first thing I need to do is I need to tell the Falcon what to listen for. And we do that using the input definition and the Falcon. And it gives us a warning. It says we're about to trash our Falcon and load a whole bunch of data to it. That's cool. It's in its Falcon, its fresh settings, and that upload is complete. So if we come back here and we go back and we reload our ArtNet settings, it's now listening for universes 100 through to 130, which are exactly the ones that we set it for. So it's all good. So now it's listening for the right things, but our string ports is all bad. It's all bad, all bad. So let's update that. So come back here, upload to controller. In this case, we want the output definition, and we're uploading it to the Falcon. Takes a little bit longer, but that's now done. And we'll go back and we'll reload this. And cross your fingers, stand on one foot, recite your favorite chant, and wait for the Falcon. Waiting, waiting.
Looks like we need to start pushing David for a 64-bit Falcon.
Yeah, I find the web interface in the Falcon can be a bit slow at times. It hasn't crashed, so there's no reason why this shouldn't work. Come on, don't make a liar out of me.
Does this upload only work if you're directly connected to the Falcon? It can't go through wireless, through the Pi?
No, there's no reason why you can't. It's
Okay.
it's just a network connection.
Okay, thank you.
Come on, what's the Falcon doing? Oh, it's downloading it.
Keith, do you notice that now in the background it's saying main board with one expansion? That is not how you had it configured when you sent it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. I'm just...
Oh, the strings.xml failed. File, oh. Okay, well there's the strings.xml. Looks good to me. Come on, you can do this. So yeah, xLights has automatically switched the board over into an expansion port mode because it knows that there must be at least one expansion board in order for this to work.
Ah, okay. I see. Because I know it
Oh,
does
there it
that.
goes.
Oh, there it goes.
I have no idea why it was playing up, but I haven't changed anything. All right. Okay, some interesting things here. So it's bought in and it's set up the configuration. For some reason, oh, I suspect I know what's going on. I suspect what's happened is I've put too many pixels onto various outputs. Although, doesn't look like it. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a problem here. This configuration is actually not legal on the Falcon. You can see that this Polyline, I've tried to set 492 pixels, but there's just not enough left. After I have after I have 600 pixels here, this can't be 492 because that would add up to more than 1,024, and that's what's causing the problem. I think.
So you're saying you put too many pixels in xLights, because I know the roof you did 600.
Actually, no, that's not true. That's not true. Because that's actually on port 14, so that's okay. That should be 492. That should be okay.
So Keith, one of the things I was doing with mine was just kind of zeroing this out, just putting in universe 1 and cloning it before pushing.
Yeah, that shouldn't be necessary.
Okay, because mine pushes really fast.
So it looks, yeah, okay. So for some reason, it's lost its universe settings. That's why it's giving me errors. That's
Sure
okay.
did.
Well, that's okay. I can reload those. Okay. Come on. Okay.
And are you using .27, Keith?
Yeah, slightly beyond that, but yeah. I'm not sure what's going on with the Falcon. There's nothing wrong with that data. All right, I'm going to move on. All right, so that's basically how you would configure all of your props. That's how you would tie them into your controller settings, how you would upload it. Not sure why it didn't upload properly. I have to talk to Dave about that, because I'll grab the logs and share them with him. So what else did I want to cover that I haven't covered? So I'm going to cover a couple of random things now. Floodlights. Some people have asked, how do I model a floodlight in xLights? By far the easiest way, let's say you're doing a dumb RGB floodlight. I've got a string of 8 of them that run along the top of my fence here. The easiest way to do this is to model it as a single line. I'm going to set it to 8. 1 light per node, looks good. I can leave them as pixels because they're 8 independent, so that's okay. And I would then come down into the appearance here. I'd set the pixel size to 12. That'll turn them into big circles. Actually, let's go bigger. 22, even bigger circles. And then I would make them blended. And you can see now they look kind of like floodlights. If you're doing them on your house, you might even want to make those circles bigger, and it creates a floodlight type effect, which is reasonably representative when you're sequencing. So very, very easy to do that. What else? We've talked about check sequence. We've talked about uploading. We've talked about exporting models. When you've got it all going and you've got everything set up and it all looks okay, obviously there is the test tab here where you can come in here and do your testing. You can either choose to turn things on and off based on the controller or the universes being sent to your controllers, or you can come down here to your models and you can choose particular models and select those, and then you can go and send your data out. If there's pixels, I'd probably do the RGBs, and here you can set a chase of a third or whatever, and you can set the background colors and so forth using the sliders and test everything. If things don't work, and let's face it, often they don't, a couple of things I would start with. So the first thing I would always do is put my controller into its test mode and check to see that the controller actually lights the lights up. Because if your controller can't drive your lights, there is not a chance in hell that xLights can drive your lights. So you need to get your controller actually controlling your lights correctly. The next thing that I would look at is on the status page, and your controller may have similar, How weird's that? See, there's 31 universes here. Yet when I go to the string ports E1.31 ArtNet page, I only saw the one. Now I'm even more confused. Oh no, there they all are. Maybe I just need to give it time. All right, so that's the secret. When you upload to the Falcon controller, give it a cup of tea, particularly a nice warm cup of tea, and give it a couple
Somebody
of minutes.
has a question for you in chat.
And everything's come across correctly, and all the start channels look correct. So how's weird's that? I didn't do anything other than give it a few minutes to catch up. And now it's caught up and everything looks cool.
Hey Keith, the question in chat is got a mega tree that starts at 14.1 and then
Universe 14, start channel 1, yes, yep.
And then one controller connection, and then he has a star on the top following the mega tree on the same output. Does he do a virtual string in the Falcon?
All right. So, okay. So when you do something like this, so I assume it's a multiple string tree, right? So it's not just one connection on his controller?
It said one connection on the controller.
Oh, it's one connection. Oh, okay. Yep. Well, so if it's one connection, life's easy. The problem you run into is if it's more than one connection, you're in sort of that's hard crap time and you're on your own. If you've just got one output, let's say I put a star on the top of one of these spiral trees. Let's say it's the last one. I'll put a mini star on the top. Okay, it's crazy. It's got more pixels than the bloody tree does, but that's okay. We'll make it. Let's make it a 10 pixel tree. Okay. When I set the start channel here, what I'll do is I will set it to be at the end of my 5th spiral tree. And you always want to make sure that this is number 1 when you're doing it at the end of a model. Some people end up having the absolute number that it used to be up here, and that's going to cause you a world of pain. Make sure it's a 1. All right, so there's my 10 pixel tree on the end of the star, or on the end of this tree here. Now, this thing here is on 281121, so I need to make sure that that tree there is also on the same controller connection, like that. And then when you upload it to the controller, I actually add together all of these 5 spiral trees plus the star, because I know they're all on the same connection, and that's the number of pixels that I would be outputting. Now, the thing to make sure is that when you define them in xLights, you define them all to be consecutive. Don't try and put this star in some random other universe elsewhere, because if you do that, then you're absolutely right. You're back to virtual strings. And once you get to virtual strings, you cannot configure virtual strings from xLights. When you get into those weird configurations, you're on your own and you need to go back and learn how to configure your Falcon controller manually, because xLights can't help you. All right, let's quickly go back into that test tab though, because one of the other signs that, so people often say, well, nothing's coming on, so it's got to be, whose fault is it, what's going on? So one of the things that you can do is if you bring up the test tab, output to lights here is on, and if I go to the status page on the Falcon here, you see these packet counts, and notice how that packet count just changed. That tells me that xLights is sending data to my Falcon. So it's not a networking issue. I know for sure that the Falcon is sending data to, xLights is sending data to the Falcon. And if you've put the Falcon into test mode and you know that the lights are coming on, then the most likely reason for your problem is some misalignment between the setups of the string ports and your models in xLights. And, you know, if you did the upload, you can be pretty comfortable that they're probably right. If you set them up manually, you need to go back and check all of your numbers. Now, the reason why I would strongly recommend you getting to a point where you can use the upload is you can see that there are a lot of things that have to be typed in here. And if you get those numbers slightly wrong, if you define your universes in the Falcon as 510 channels, but you define them in xLights as 512, if you slightly get the numbers wrong in the string ports screen, if you get one of these numbers wrong, you're going to get strange behavior, and you're going to then spend the next few hours chasing around trying to work out, well, what did I get wrong? You can see here, you know, it's been smart enough to set the protocol correctly on those strings of lights. It's got all these universe and start channels right. When we hit the spiral trees, you know, it's added all those spiral trees up correctly. This doesn't include the star because I haven't re-uploaded it, but it's gone through and worked all of that out correctly and made sure that it's configured right and it will work. So again, strongly recommend that if you can keep everything reasonably standard. And what do I mean by reasonably standard? Well, a couple of things. So as you saw, it's okay to have multiple models on a single universe, or on a single output, sorry, as long as they're all in sequence, right? And obviously you can't exceed the limits of how many pixels can be on a particular output. And when you get to the end, you can't have the last model spanning over onto another output on the controller. Everything's got to be on a single string of lights, all connected together. You can obviously also have a single model on a single output, like I do this arch and the like. That's all cool. You can also have a model like a tree here that's using 4 outputs, as long as those 4 outputs are sequential, right? Remember when we did the node layout, it said I was going to use controller connections 1 to 4. You know, don't do them, 1, 6, 9, and 14 or something, because that ain't going to work. It needs to be sequential. And when you do it that way, when you wire it into your controller that way, then the xLights upload to your controller will configure your controller for you automatically. Otherwise, you're going to have to go and manually set it up. Now, what happens if you've got one prop which is kind of complicated and everything else is standard? That also works reasonably well. So let's imagine for the moment that this arch here, I don't know, I did something funky with it. And consequently, I can't just upload it to the Falcon. So all you do is blank out the controller connection. When you blank out the controller connection, xLights is not going to send that particular arch up to the Falcon. And so any configurations that you might manually do on the Falcon will stay in place. And so now when I do the upload to the controller, to the output, you'll get an extra warning. So gives me the warning about I'm uploading it, and then I will get this warning here. And so what it's saying to me is it's saying, hang on a second, you've got this arch thing which does not have the controller connection completed. And so I'm just going to ignore that model. And that's okay, right? Because I don't want to set it, because I'm going to do something really weird on the Falcon end. Such as, set up virtual strings or something, and I don't want the upload to the Falcon to overwrite that. It's very interesting. All right, that's somewhere along the way, I think I've got it confused. All right. So I think that's all I had as specific topics that I wanted to go through, which leaves me about 15 minutes to handle questions.
Hey Keith, is there a supported or a list of supported controllers that this upload works to?
Yeah, you right click here and you go upload to controller. So FPP bridge mode, it only does the input side of the FPP bridge mode. So if you've got a RGB 123 cape, if you've got a Pi cap, whatever else, and you want your Falcon Pi player to be listening for certain universes, and you want to upload that, that's what FPP bridge mode will do. Obviously, there's a Falcon controller. The SAN devices supports the E6804 and E682, but only the version 4 firmware. I've never tested it with the 5 because I haven't got around to upgrading the 2 SAN devices boards that people gave to me to version 5 yet to get that to work. It will also do the xLights. Now, I've tested this with the xLight long range, but in theory it should work with the other xLights. Someone did lend me a xLight 4, and I tested it with that, and it was working fine. And the J1 will work with the J1 P2s. So they're the only controllers that I've supported so far. Quite frankly, getting these things to work is seriously complex because generally speaking, their interfaces are not documented. And so I have to reverse engineer each controller, and I can't do that just by someone saying to me, oh, can you do controller X, Y, Z? It's not possible. So these are the controllers I have access to. Every controller I have access to, I have been steadily building the uploads to them.
Okay, great. We have a question in chat about multiple Falcons. Do you upload each controller individually, or can you upload them at the same time?
You do upload them individually. So you would obviously have a second IP address here listed for your other Falcon, and you would upload it separately. And you can choose to upload to one and not the other. You might choose to configure one entirely manually, and the other one you might choose to do the upload to because it works.
Keith, can you do the FPP bridge mode explanation again? I didn't quite catch that.
So FPP bridge mode, I don't have a Falcon plugged in, so I can't demonstrate it. But if you're running something like an RGB 123K, which I do, where I have 48 outputs from my Pi, or you're running a Pi cap where you have 2 or 3 outputs, the Pi needs to listen for the network packets that it's going to display. And the bridge mode will upload to the Pi the list of universes that it should listen for. What it won't do is configure the outputs. I haven't built that yet. The challenge I've got with the Falcon Pi Player, to be honest, is the damn thing does too many different things, and it's really, really hard to configure it in a way that just doesn't bring a lot of complexity into xLights.
Okay, let me re-ask my question I asked earlier because I don't think I asked it correctly. My setup is my Falcon is connected to my Pi, and I usually use FPP to play my show.
Right.
So I'm hardwired over through my network to the Pi, and then I have a wireless connection going to. No, I'll take that back. I'm wireless to the Pi, and I am hardwired, obviously, to the Falcon. So can I push from xLights that way?
You can as long as you set up bridging. So if you can log into your Falcon, your Falcon V3 from your computer via your Pi, then absolutely you can push your configuration through the Pi to the Falcon.
Does this work with a V2? I don't have a V3.
Yeah, it works with a V2 as well. As long as you set your Falcon up correctly so that you can bridge through. And there's a video I created at the Sydney Mini which talks about how you go about setting that up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Keith, it's Brett, mate. Just a quick one for you, just to clarify that question around my tree before. I actually went back and checked my config. It actually is going over 2 outputs of the expansion board of Falcon, so that changes what my original question was. Output.
And you're on your own. You need to go and manually configure that. I cannot configure that.
Okay, cool. So because the expansion board ports will only support so many pixels, so that's why I've had to go over multiple ports.
Yep.
So, okay.
Yep, but you're on your own.
Really? Okay, cool.
Rich?
Any smarter way of doing it?
Well, everything's a trade-off, right? One thing you could do is you could put your star onto a separate connection onto your controller, but that obviously uses up another connection on your controller. And if your connections on your controller are at a premium, then maybe that's not for you. It all comes down to the constraints that you're working with, and what you can afford to do and what you can't afford to do. I mean, I can sit here and say don't do it, and if you want to do the upload automatically, I would say don't do it. But if you've got constraints, you've only got so many outputs to play with, etc., and that's the way you can squeeze the most out of your controllers, then I guess that's the position you're in, and you just need to deal with the fact that you've got to manually configure it because it's not simple to do.
That's right. So the issue is not the tree itself going over the two outputs. The issue is having that pixel star on top of it running on that second output, correct?
That's right. That's where it gets complicated. If you move that star onto a third output, you'd be fine. But you may not have a third output.
I'll go find one somewhere.
All right. Keith, I'm one of those people that has a matrix problem with uneven string lengths. I have a vertical matrix with 6 strands wrapped 4 times and the 7th strand wrapped 2 times. So the matrix is whatever. Is a custom model the way to go? Yes and no. One of the things that you can do is you can model your matrix as if the 7th strand is actually still 4 strands. So rather than modeling it as it is, you model it slightly bigger than it is. Now, the downside of that is obviously those last 2 strands don't really exist. And so any effects or anything that appears on those last 2 strands won't actually light anything up. But from simplicity of configuration, it works. It just means you've got a bunch of data that goes nowhere. But if you want to represent it accurately, then yes, custom model is the only way to accurately represent that sort of matrix. Any other questions?
Yeah, but it's going to take a while. I'll wait till later.
Can I review submodels for a few minutes? I can review submodels. Okay. So I'm going to use this one, and I'm going to hope that someone's actually already done the submodels on this. So associated with pretty much every model is the ability to create submodels. And this person has not defined any submodels. But let's imagine we wanted to. Let's imagine we wanted an outline of the bell and the clangers as separate submodels. So I'm going to add clanger 1 as a submodel. And I'm going to come over here, and you can see 75, 76, 77, 85, 86. So it looks like 75 to 86 looks like that's the node ranges, and it is. All right, so that's going to create a submodel called clanger 1. I can add clanger 2. What do we got here? It's 56. Yeah, it looks like 56 to 67. Yep, that looks okay. And we'll add another one, which is the outline of the thing. Now, this is going to be a little bit more complicated because we said it starts from 56. So I'm guessing 1 to 55 are probably part of the outline. Now, I would argue actually 56 and 57 are also part of the outline. There's no reason why these things need to be exclusive. And then 66 to 76. 66 to 76. That's not a semicolon, it's a comma. Yep, there, that looks good. And then 85, and where does it end over here? I reckon 85 to 109. 85 to 109. Done. That's the outline. And that's how you simply go and create a submodel. And if you then go and sequence it, so we'll just quickly create a sequence. And we'll go to our bell. You can see that down here, there's my clanger 1, clanger 2, and my outline, which I can now sequence as if they were independent models, but they're actually part of a broader model. The other thing that you can do is with submodels is you can take something like this, this tree and break it up into, say, horizontal layers. And you would do that by coming into submodels. And I would click on generate and I would say I actually want horizontal slices. I want, I don't know, 10 of them horizontally. And so it's gone and it's created me 10 submodels, which are layers. And, you know, I could use that to put morphs across or something and break the tree up in a variety of different ways.
Hey, Keith?
Yeah.
I was going to say one thing about that. When you create those submodels like that, what works really well if you're going to sequence that is to put those in a group and start applying effects at that group level. You get some really interesting effects through those segments up and down the tree.
So to do that, we'd say our tree horizontal group.
Yep.
Right, and then we would come down here. Okay, I didn't give them a sensible name, so it's actually these things here. So we're going to grab all of these. We're going to drag them across. Now, the 10, I probably, order matters, so I'm going to drag the 10 down to the bottom. Okay, and I'm going to save that. And so now I've got a group here, which I didn't cover creation of groups earlier, which contains all of those submodels.
Okay. Keith, I don't know if you're running out of time, but this might be a good opportunity to show them, now that you've created a new group, how do you get that in on the master and whatever you may be sequencing from in xLights?
Oh, okay.
On the sequencing side.
So if I go back to the sequencer, it's obviously not here because I've just added it. You do that with edit display elements. Here's the group over here. I can drag it over and drop it. Generally, I'd put groups at the top. And so here it is here. There's the 10 submodels. But you don't need to sequence at that level. You can you can sequence it at the top level as well. In this case, I've dragged it over the whole thing, but you can come up to the render style and set it to per model. And now I've got 10 butterflies on 10 layers on the tree.
Beautiful.
Looks a bit weird, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Was there any other questions? Final questions?
Yeah, there's one in chat, Keith.
Is there? Oh,
Yeah.
my house has a little depth to it. So does mine. Mine has a lot of depth to it. So I have some gutter lights that I have in the past just placed vertical for one that go down the side of the house. I don't understand the question.
Hey, Keith.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm trying to figure out in the two-dimensional picture, the gutter lights that go down into the picture itself.
Oh.
Vertically for visual purposes.
Right.
Is it better just to do a side preview of the house?
So what a lot of people do, let's imagine for the moment that, see here on my arch, right, there's this little gap here because the gutter here is actually set back a bit. And let's imagine, actually that's probably not a good example. But what I've seen people do, let's say I have lights running down the back of my house here. What I've often seen people do is, where there's depth, is they'll draw something like this at 45 degrees. Now, it obviously doesn't look like their house in reality, but it's good enough. And to be honest, a thing that a lot of new people make a mistake is to think that people actually spot all of the things that they spot about their house. All most people see is blinky lights, right? And 9 out of 10 people don't even realize the damn thing's set to music half the time. Right? Seriously, they come up there and they visit the third time. And they said, "Oh, I didn't know there was music." So yeah, doing something like this for something that has depth and you can't quite see because of the way your photograph's taken, that'll work just fine. The other thing is, pick a view of your house that actually helps you. Pick a view of the house that's, you know, the most common. If you've got a corner block, it's obviously more complicated. Multiple previews can work, but there are real limitations with multiple previews as well, and it won't necessarily give you a better result. So if you look at Sean's house, I think Sean does this. When he does his house, he's got a sort of a set of lights that go off at a weird angle, which is because he's got depth and he wants to create some horizontal spacing so that when he puts an effect on it, he gets it. And remember, when you sequence the thing, you don't have to sequence it per preview. You can sequence the thing as if it's a straight horizontal line and do chases and everything else. The fact that it looks like that doesn't make any difference.
Thanks, Keith.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the record.